Okay. Yes, we have a handout. Yeah. For anyone who did not get a handout, there are handouts over here. This is very informal, so feel free to get up and grab it. If you don't have one. Welcome everybody in person and on Zoom. Can you guys hear me okay? Or do we need Kate's leaning? Training it. How's that?
It's actually just that little thing in the middle, not the microphones are for the room, the little tiny thing next to the gavel is the Zoom mic.
Okay, but is this for the room?
Yeah, that's for the
So
room.
you guys can hear me better if I pull this closer towards me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great. So we'll even closer. Okay, so we will share, Ben and I will share. So welcome everybody. I'm Laura Silver. I am the housing planner for the Martha Vineyard Commission. This is the Housing Action Task Force meeting for January. It's the first meeting of the new year, and we're really thrilled to have you all here and to have Senator Sear with us with his staff, his chief of staff, his new chief of staff, Kathleen Patrons, and Michael Holcomb, district director, is in the back. And we'd also like to welcome a very special guest, Eric Shupin, who is the the chief of policy for the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which is under the Secretary of Housing. And this is the first time that we have had a dedicated Secretary of Housing in the state of Massachusetts. So we're delighted to have him here. And Ben Bryant, who is his policy manager also for Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which we frequently shorten to EOHLC. So when you hear us say that,
Rolls off the tongue.
it's good. That's what it is. So we're here tonight to talk about the Affordable Homes Act and what it means for the Martha's Vineyard towns and the community of Martha's Vineyard, to get your questions answered and to have our state senator, who really is leading the charge at state level on the transfer fee and the seasonal communities designation, talk about what this landmark proposal means to our community, and also get your feedback and your input on what you would like to see, any questions you might have. And then we'll do some talking together about what the senator and the administration needs from the Martha's Vineyard community to help move this legislation forward, particularly the pieces of interest to the Martha's Vineyard community. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julian.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here, and grateful that the weather has been cooperating. I feel like we're here in a lull between storms. But I'm Julian Sear. I'm the state senator for the Cape and Islands district that includes the 6 towns we have here on Martha's Vineyard. It's 19 towns across Cape Cod and Nantucket, and of course here on the Vineyard. We're a number of hats, but have really been working since I was elected on housing policy. You don't need to hear from me how tremendously challenging our collective failure on housing and to build the housing and preserve the housing for year-round people here on island and across the region is. I cannot speak to anyone in my district who is not, well, there's a few delusional NIMBYs out there, but I rarely speak to decision makers, town officials, business owners, members of our schools, people who are providing services to the most vulnerable in our communities, who are not truly grappling with the outcomes of the housing crisis that we've been facing, really for sort of over 20 years. And this problem has only been exacerbated and really put on steroids in COVID-19 and the aftermath of COVID-19, where already astronomical housing prices have gotten to the point where housing, the ability to own a home and live here is increasingly out of reach for anyone who doesn't already is fortunate to own a home or have a foothold here. This is even true of myself personally, right? So I was born and raised in Truro. Spent most of my life on the Outer Cape. I'm the state senator, pretty privileged, powerful, well-compensated person, right? I can't afford to buy a home, and by a home, I mean like a 300 square foot condo, in the part of the district where I live on the Outer Cape in Provincetown or in Truro. And I just think that the effects of this are really far reaching. And so the inflection point that we're in as an island community here, in the community in Nantucket, on the Outer Cape, and increasingly across all of Cape Cod, is what are our communities going to be able to do our communities are essentially going to have to get into the business of subsidizing housing, not just for those below area median income, sort of the traditional affordable housing, which our towns have done, in our communities and as a whole, it's just state and federal programs, but really subsidizing housing for people who make 150, 180, 200% of area median income. I see my friend Tucker Holland from Nantucket. On Nantucket, we talk about subsidizing housing for up to 240% of area median income. And that's just because for year-round islanders or year-round Cape Codders, you need to make, 3, 4, 5 times the area median income just to be able to afford a home here. And by the way, we're competing in a luxury real estate market where even if you've got the resources, you're probably not going to be able to outcompete someone with a cash-only offer. And so this is where, our community is truly at a crossroads. It's been at a crossroads for, quite some time, but really, it's really, really quite acute. And I really don't have, the situation's I think it's actually dire. I think it's worse than we even realize. And you really see this play out. If you go look at the schools, right, and the composition of our schools, or you go look at utilization of the island's food pantry. You look at how with a community where, especially for those who rent, but also those who are able to cobble together to own, are spending 50%, 60%, 70% of their income on housing. And so this is a crisis. This is a workforce crisis. But this is also sort of existential for who we are as a people, right? Of islanders and Cape Codders who make our lives here. And the good news is that we're really making some traction on this issue statewide. And I think we're tremendously fortunate, and I'm really grateful to our Governor Maura Healey and Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, who have been out in the hustings, right? First in their campaign, and now in this last year, and have really seen and understood that the housing crisis that, yes, is gripping the island, that's gripping the Cape and Islands, and most all of Massachusetts, is really the biggest challenge facing the state. And so what do we got to do about it? Broadly, in a Commonwealth with 351 distinct municipalities that has prioritized local control of zoning and land use, broadly, that's been a disaster. We've done a bad job as communities at building the housing that we need for our communities. And too often we've prioritized and stood behind good values, but we've sort of exploited, conservation and environmentalism and historic preservation simply to limit available units and to ensure that those who, have existing, are fortunate to have existing ownership, that we keep those values high and we keep those values escalating. But really, I think the governor and the lieutenant governor and her administration really understand how this is a serious, serious issue to the future of this state. And if you look at population trends in Massachusetts, who is leaving the state? Well, they're people who look like me and Eric and Kathleen, right? They're in their 20s up to early 40s. People who, many of whom are professionals, who are leaving the state because they can't afford housing. And for those who don't have the resources to leave the state, they're increasingly being pushed out further into exurbs, or in this case, pushed further off island into really sort of unsustainable circumstances. And so what we're really fortunate now is to have a new governor who very clearly sees the housing crisis as a threat that it is for the viability of the state, for the future of the state. And so this is where Governor Healey has made housing her #1 top priority. This fall, the administration filed a $4.1 billion housing bond bill. This is the largest bond bill ever been filed. And in that is a whole host of resources for our communities and for various housing efforts, and also several policy remedies and tools that we have been clamoring for on this island for several years, that our friends on Nantucket have been clamoring for over a decade, and really, I think, provides quite a bit of promise. And in a minute, you're going to hear from the architects and the drafters of that housing bond bill. And it's so great to have Eric and Ben here with us tonight. And so the governor in the governor's bill, and you hear more about this, the governor's bill sets the table for what this debate we're going to have in the legislature is related to a major housing bill, both with dollars with borrowing capacity for housing at an unprecedented level, and also policy remedies. In the policy remedies, that includes a transfer fee on real estate, something that I think over a decade ago, the town of Nantucket filed a home rule petition for. 2 years ago, all 6 island towns joined Provincetown, Truro, Wellfleet, and Chatham in filing a home rule petition to have a local option transfer fee, joining Boston, Somerville, Cambridge, Lexington, Amherst, maybe a few other communities, right? Really wanting to access this tool. The fact that the governor proposed a transfer fee in the housing bond bill is a game changer. And yes, we're working out the specifics, and we got to tweak some things to make sure it works. But really, this is she's really sort of put a stake in the ground and really reset the table around having a transfer fee be sort of the revenue source that we need. And what we're asking for with a transfer fee, right? This is very much, we're very much saying, look, help us help ourselves, right? Where we can generate the revenue right here on island that we can then use and deploy for housing. So the transfer fee component is absolutely essential. The other piece that's acknowledged in this bill is the idea of a seasonal communities designation, acknowledging that communities like ours that have significant flux in our population, in our unemployment, where we have a real estate market, really that's driven by investment properties or second and third, fourth homes, that we need a different set of tools from the state to address this problem. And so by proposing and providing the scaffolding for a seasonal communities designation, the governor, again, is sort of setting on the table the idea that we need to be providing resources and services and tools that may be a bit unique, maybe a bit novel, but are urgently needed in Oak Bluffs and in Wellfleet and on Nantucket and across Cape Cod, potentially with our friends in the Berkshires and potentially a few other communities. So this is big, exciting stuff. I'll talk a little bit about sort of the timeline for this from a legislative perspective. And then I really want you all to hear from, Eric and Ben on really what went into this and then getting feedback, right? So we're now in the process. The governor filed the bill in the fall. The bill is going to the housing bond bill will receive a hearing next Thursday. I know island communities have already worked on testimony, which is great. There's going to be a virtual option for this hearing as well. So islanders can participate from the comfort of your own homes, which is much preferable than schlepping up to Boston. But if you want to come up to Boston with us, you're very much welcome. And once the bill is then heard, the committee will take action on the bill. It'll probably be another month or so. I expect this is something that so this is the bond bill, right? So that the House has to move first on any money bill under our Constitution, much to the senator's chagrin. Senators are always wanting to do revenue bills, but we got to wait in the House. So it's going to start in the House, probably something they take up after their budget. They do the budget in the spring. We'll take up this housing bond bill afterwards. Then it will come over to the Senate. I bet we take ours up in the spring as well, likely after all the budget that we do. And then we'll have a conference committee to reconcile the two versions of the bill and get something to the governor's desk by the end of the legislative session on July 31st. So quite a bit of work in the less than 6 months that we have. I serve on the Joint Committee on Housing. I'm deeply engaged in the mechanics of this bill and this issue. My good friend and colleague, Senator Lydia Edwards, who is the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Housing, just before the holiday, before Christmas, traveled to the district. We did a whirlwind tour of the Cape Lions district. We couldn't finagle getting to the vineyard, but we went to Nantucket and spent an afternoon on Nantucket. We had a series of meetings on the Mid-Cape and then out to the Outer Cape and Provincetown to look at a whole host of the really specific policy remedies that that we're looking for, and really asking big questions in the transfer fee, right? What's the right threshold of that transfer fee, right? Where should it start? The governor's proposal has it in a certain place. Should we do it another way? What's the right dialing mechanism for municipalities to municipalities able to like sort of move up the percentage and down? Does it apply to the buyer or the seller, or can that be decided by the community? What are the right exemptions, right? Getting the exemptions that exist from a transfer fee, getting those right. First-time home buyers is one that's talked about, nonprofits, others. And then importantly and most relevant to the island is the ability for municipalities to pool transfer fee revenue into what we call regional affordable housing commissions. A regional affordable housing commission is essentially what your housing bank will be. And so it's important that as we craft this bill, that we allow municipalities to pool resources. So, we're not having to go back and kind of tinker with the law for it to fit to island concerns. And then, big questions about where do the transfer fee dollars go, right? Can it just go to the town to be used for anything related to housing? Does it have to go into sort of a dedicated certain kind of fund or trust? What does that look like? And how do we have flexibility for the transfer fee for here, right? We need to both preserve housing and construct housing. So having the ability to do that. And then with Senator Edwards, a whole host of conversations about what sort of is in the meat of the seasonal communities designation, looking at everything from deed restrictions to lease to local programs, and a whole host of other programs we think could help make a difference in sort of smaller but important tools to bring to this effort. So that's where we are from a legislative perspective. But you're now going to hear from the real experts on this policy, and to have Eric and Ben here with us on island is truly wonderful, and I think is reflective of the governor and lieutenant governor's commitment to not only represent every corner of the Commonwealth, but really show up in every corner of the Commonwealth. Governor Healy's been on island. I've been with her 3 times on this island in her first year in office. I was elected in 2016. I had never been on island with the prior governor. I think he came here once and didn't come here with me or with Dylan. And so that is really sort of reflective of the spirit of this administration and the real hands-on work that they're doing to try to make sure that we get this policy right. So I'm really excited and honored to have them here. We've got a big consequential next 5.5 odd months and counting to get this done, and really hoping we can knock it out of the park. So Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Sear. I really appreciate all those kind words, and wanting to thank the Martha's Vineyard Commission for hosting us, for inviting us down. The senator talked about how the governor really is about connecting with communities, in communities visiting. So is my boss, Secretary at Augustus, the Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities, who couldn't be here tonight, but wanted to make sure that we were represented. And we've already talked about when we've been putting together this campaign for the Affordable Homes Act, we've been out across the Commonwealth, and the Secretary's already traveled over 3,000 miles across Massachusetts, visiting communities and housing authorities and developments and talking with residents. And so that's a direct charge from our governor is show up and be there. And so we're glad that we can do that, and we hope that we can come back again soon, or visit Nantucket. I know I took the ferry over with Tucker this afternoon and said, I need to get to Nantucket too. So thank you. And this is
P-Town.
And well, I'd love to.
Well, you go to prom.
Been there.
Can never visit enough.
But this is the first kind of regional listening session, legislative briefing on the Affordable Homes Act like this, with so many town officials here, municipal officials. So it's a really wonderful opportunity for us to connect with local governments, and so we appreciate that. I can't underscore, and this will just be a love fest, but I can't underscore the importance of Senator Sear's leadership on these issues. Before my time at Housing and Livable Communities, I worked at an organization called CHAPA, which was advocated for affordable housing. And whenever we needed a champion on an issue, whenever there was something that was hard to take up and it's controversial, we know we could go to Senator Sear and look to him for his leadership to say, hey, yeah, this is going to be hard, but let's do it. And so we really appreciate that. And when it comes to what you see in the Affordable Homes Act today, that comes from the governor coming down and having conversations with you, and engaging with Senator Sear, with all the folks here. I do hope that you feel like you were listened to, because that was the point. The transfer fee, the seasonal communities designation, we unabashedly borrowed some of those ideas directly from legislation that Senator Sear has been working on. So we appreciate that, and thank you for allowing us to do that. The ongoing advocacy from the islands, just to touch on that. I've, working with Laura the past few months, it's been a really wonderful collaboration. She's another reason why I wanted to make sure we were here is because Laura's been up to see us so many times already, meeting with us in our office, with the secretary, then going right to the State House. So that kind of collaborative relationship, I hope can continue, but it's made such a difference for having you. And then again, I'm just going to point to Tucker because you've also been up there with us for all your work on this. And also mention my wonderful friend in the back, Dan O'Connell too, who has been there talking through all these issues with us too. And so I appreciate the support that he's offered as well. But it really matters, and I want to let you know that it makes a difference and has shaped what the housing agenda is for the governor and hopefully for the Commonwealth. It's critical that we hope that you'll stay involved, that all the town governments here, the island communities will continue to engage with us, but now especially also with the legislature. Senator Sear and his colleagues, we hope that you talk to all of them. And we hope that you talk to his colleagues in the House. Rep. Fernandez is also outstanding when it comes to housing issues, and certainly on the transfer fee has supported that. But they need your support and your help at the State House, so that other legislators can hear directly from those who are impacted by the housing challenges that we face. And we know that there are so many more issues that we need to work on. We put together the Affordable Homes Act within the first 4 months that we were there. The Office of Housing and Livable Communities began on June 1st. And so 4 months later, we had our Affordable Homes Act. Could we do everything that we know we need to do in this one bill? No, there's still so much work that needs to be done. And other issues that we know face the islands. We've been in active discussions about the municipal workforce preference for housing, and have engaged again, both with Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket on this. And we look forward to continuing those conversations. It's a real issue when it comes to, schools having teachers, first responders being able to live here on the islands, literally helped keep the water running because your municipal workers can't afford to live here. So we've heard that, and we'll continue to work with you on these issues. And again, just appreciate that engagement over the short, brief few months that we've been around, and about a year now for Governor Healey's administration. We know we need new tools and strategies. It's resources, yes, but also the policies that go along with it. And that's what you see in the Affordable Homes Act, a $4.12 billion spending package for affordable housing resources, $1.6 billion for our state's public housing, $800 million for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is our most flexible tool to build housing, hundreds of million dollars for programs like the Facilities Consolidation Fund and community-based housing programs that serve persons with disabilities. Those are critical investments, and I'm proud of the fact that the governor has doubled down on this, and in many cases doubled the amount of investments that we've seen since our last bond bill, which was only $1.8 billion back in 2018. But it's also about the resources, the tools that we can provide, and that's the 28 different policy provisions that the governor included in her Affordable Homes Act, including the transfer fee and seasonal communities designation. Another key one that I'm really excited about is accessory dwelling units by right, having every city and town being allowed to build accessory dwelling units. This is a gentle way to add more homes for families, for seniors who want to age in place in their communities, for persons with disabilities who maybe want a family with a adult child with disability. That's an opportunity for them to live independently but stay in the community. So really critical resources and tools that we need to move forward on housing. This is really, it's an existential threat that we're facing. This is about the future of the Commonwealth. The stakes cannot be higher when it comes to tackling our housing challenges. And I'm excited that Governor Healey really has, made this her top priority. And I hope that's demonstrated through her Affordable Homes Act. But we have to work together to achieve it. Senator Sear laid out the timeline. It's short. We have a lot to get done in the next few months, but it's really exciting because this is a historic piece of legislation that would be the largest housing investment in the state's history, some of the largest housing policy changes in the state's history. And we need all of you to testify, seeing these letters to Chair Arcier and Chair Edwards of the Housing Committee and going to the legislature is I'm so excited to see that because that's exactly what needs to happen. Reaching out and connecting with legislators. And so hope that you can show up on Thursday if you can, either virtually or in person. I know that there's a delegation coming up to the State House. Laura will be there and we'll be testifying for all of these critical resources. And so just wanted to say thank you again for hosting us and engaging with us. And I hope that this collaboration continues as we get this done. So I don't know at this point, opening up, to go through the bill in more detail, or
I think to open it up for questions, I also do want to note too that we have, in addition to the towns here, we do have representation from Dukes County from a bunch of different departments. We have the Regional Housing Authority. I see Dukes County Commissioners here. I see Harbor Homes here. And we also are very honored to have representation from tribal government here from the Wampanoag tribe of Gehidaquina. So I want to welcome their new housing administrator, Dave Zimmerman, and the chief of staff, Kevin, who's right next to him, Kevin Devine. Thank you so much for being here. So I know, and Julie Vanderhoop, who's select board for Aquina and also a member of the Wampanoag tribe of Gehidaquina, and she actually spoke on the steps of the State House last March. So
Yeah, that was pretty, that event, folks should know that event is talked about quite a bit in the legislature. And I think many of the people in the room and with us virtually were there, but to have, 300 Islanders all in those great t-shirts, not t-shirts, they're long. I just found mine the other day. It was like reorganizing the winter to summer clothes, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." I was gonna take it and turn it into like a little tank toppy thing, and then I was like, "Oh no, I didn't get around to it." So now I have it for the winter.
there's
But
a t-shirt version now.
oh, there is. I want both and the tank top. But but that really like left a mark on my colleagues, right? And for those of you who were in the room, first to come in and to be in the Senate and to hear from the Senate President and Senator Edwards and others, and then on the steps, it's talked about. I was at a local watering hole across the street from the State House last month, and I was talking to a State House news reporter who brought it up. So it really made I think an impression, and helping. I think the administration really gets it, but helping my colleagues understand how dire the challenge we have is. And although there's, on the transfer fee, right, there's some clear opposition to this, right? The Mass Association of Realtors and other entities sort of in the traditional sort of business community, are opposed to it almost on kind of philosophical grounds. But, it's really hard to take a look at our communities here on the island or on Nantucket, or look at outer Cape communities, a community like Provincetown, which is doing, all it can on housing, look at Nantucket, which has appropriated tens of millions of dollars from their town meeting for housing, and not really acknowledge that the scale of the problem that we have, and what else is your solution? If we don't do a transfer fee, what else you got? And the example that we have here of the land bank, on Martha's Vineyard and the land bank on Nantucket, which uses a similar mechanism, in no way has that hurt property values. If anything, it's probably contributed in part to the escalation of housing costs, right? So that example of showing up, I think it will continue to be really key to advancing a policy, right? And if we've got if we got a local option that works for West Tisbury and works for Somerville, right, or works for Provincetown and Boston, we're getting that really good policy, and I think that momentum is really building. So just a shout out to those of you who made the trek and spoke on the steps and really showed up. It really packed a punch.
So we've been told that if anyone has a question to ask, if you could come up to the podium and speak into the microphone, because that way we have a lot of people on Zoom. Actually, that way everybody on Zoom can hear you. So, and we'd like this to be, I'd like this anyway, to be as informal as possible. This really is a community discussion. As Eric and Senator said, this is gonna take a collaboration between the islands and EOHLC and the governor's office to work with the legislature to get this to move. So does anyone have any questions, or is there anything that you'd like to discuss or like these folks to go into in more detail? Oh, it's very quiet. We did such a good job explaining. I see from Harbor Homes, I see Kristen Lights from Harbor Homes. I hope I pronounced your last name correct.
Thank you. Yeah, the E is silent, just like the H in Amherst.
Okay.
So I'm Kristen Lutz from Harbor Homes, and we serve our homeless population here on the island. And our founder Karen, she's right there, some of our board members. So thanks to our Harbor Homes community for showing up. But I just wanted to know a little bit more about how the transfer fee and the monies, how that might end up helping organizations specifically serving the very bottom of the pyramid. I know there's a lot of mid-range housing, which I'll just say, being married to a 28-year Massachusetts public school teacher, trying to locate here on the island, I personally really get the very important middle too. But I am thinking more about our most vulnerable folks and what we can do for them. Thank you.
Sure, I can, yeah. So the transfer fee, the funds that would be raised through the transfer fee, it would really be up to the community to decide. It goes into the fee itself that are collected would go into the community's municipal affordable housing trust. And then the program or the trust rules would follow those dollars. So there's not a uniform like income level that's served by every trust across the state, but can serve low, very low, or extremely low income households. But that is up for the community to decide once they have those fees. Of course, we know that it can be difficult to reach the deepest, the lowest, the most affordable housing to build that. So it can take a lot of resources. And that's why it's important to be able to raise transfer fees, because there are other resources out there that it could be paired with, like a rental voucher or other resources from the state. So in that way, I mean, it can often take a lot of different funding sources. So something like the transfer fee is just one more resource that can potentially be used for serving our most vulnerable households.
Eric, can I just interrupt for a moment? We have a parking issue. We have a FinCom member who would very much like to go home. And whoever has a Tesla that's the second car in from School Street, you are blocking the FinCom member. Would you kindly move your car? Thank you so much.
There's a lot of to continue. There's a lot of discussion in the legislature about the flexibility of talking about the bucket in where the transfer fee dollars go. And there's a bit of a conversation too in the legislature about, all right, how much latitude do we give the municipalities? Where, look, we have 351 municipalities in this Commonwealth. I represent 19 of them. I represent communities that are doing everything they possibly can on housing, that I know on day one that they get a transfer fee. The revenue from that are going to put it to like good work immediately. And then we can pick on my hometown of Truro. I think that's a fair town to pick on, right? Because I guess I'm picking on my hometown. Right. And Truro has, I think 16 units of affordable housing or something. There's this horrible, awful, negative environment I'll spare you the details, but the town's really dragged its feet. And even with the town wanting to do stuff, the voters at town meeting kind of don't want to do anything. I don't know how I feel about giving that source of revenue, an unprecedented amount of revenue. Truro, right? You're talking about between $500,000 and maybe $1 million or more in revenue a year for housing, if they don't have to have some skin in the game. And so there's some real kind of conversation about that, right? In saying to towns, we want to make sure that we have a transfer fee that can work on day one for the towns that are doing the right thing. And I think the way that the island is sort of looking at doing this, right? You're looking at doing it regionally, so you'll have that mechanism, to move pretty swiftly. But we've got towns who are not doing that. And so much in the way that if you look at CPA, right? We have municipalities who have really used and deployed CPA funds quite effectively on housing. And we've got municipalities who barely are spending a dime of CPA. They're spending the bare minimum on housing on a CPA, right? And so thinking about what are the right kind of levers, what is the right sort of balance between carrot and stick for municipalities. I think how the Commonwealth is really thinking about this is a good example. An example of how you could get at this is the MBTA communities program, which essentially required multi-unit development somewhere in the municipality if they're along the MBTA, right? You have a commuter rail in your town, or you have the T in your town. You know, you sure as heck, the legislature basically said, you sure as heck should be permitting some kind of, you know, multi-unit housing in your town, right? These are dense municipalities. We tend to think that approach has kind of worked well. So I think there's going to be a bit of a debate in the legislature about the tools that are brought. And so how do you make sure that municipalities who really are ready to go have those resources, and communities like Truro, and we're just picking on Truro because I think it's just, well, it's easier if the hometown boy picks on Truro and I don't get in trouble with my other towns. You know, right, that you would nudge a town like Truro to move more quickly on both housing production and housing preservation. I think most of the towns I represent don't understand the actual number of housing units that will need to be either built or preserved, built even new units, or preserved either by a year-round deed restriction or some other sort of mechanism for year-round use. You know, the town of Provincetown estimates they need about 350 or 400 units for year-round housing that are dedicated to year-round housing. They only have 100. So that means probably 300 additional units in Provincetown. It's a big scale. Provincetown's pretty tiny. Provincetown's 3,000 people, right? So it's, you know, a little bigger than the Up Islands and the Upper Island towns, right? But that's kind of the thinking that we're sort of trying to figure out as we actually develop the mechanism in which the revenue source and then what's going to be kind of expected.
So I will say that for the vineyard, the towns all asked the Martha's Vineyard Commission to update the 2020 housing needs assessment. So the preliminary numbers are starting to come in, and we just got the number on how many rentals we have lost since 2010. So over the last 12 years, our net loss, and I want to repeat, that's net loss. That's everything we built and everything we lost. Our net loss is over 850 units over the last 10 years, which accounts for more than 10% of our actual housing stock. So even though we have 202 units currently in the pipeline, by the time those units get on the ground, we are likely to have lost more than those units. So we're not actually getting ahead. We don't have the figures yet on homeownership, but those are pretty sobering numbers. Preliminary numbers are showing we may be looking at needing over 2,500 or over 3,000 actual units of year-round housing to ensure that those stay year-round, so that we don't lose those to attrition. So these are tools to address this we don't currently have, and that's why this bill is so incredibly important. And I will share that the conversation in the seasonal communities designation, Senator Sear has been very upfront about where the legislature is and where the administration is on really wanting to make sure that towns, as he says, have skin in the game. So I've been asking the towns, and I really appreciate that all the towns have started to look at your subsidized housing inventories. We have a real range of SHIs here from 0 all the way up to 7.9 or 8%. The state's going to be looking at that. So I really encourage the towns that have very low SHIs and are asking for municipal employee workforce housing to really consider that the state is going to be looking at that, and that some progress is they're going to be expecting to see some progress. And I think Eric will probably, you know, say the same. So now is a really good time to be looking at those numbers and thinking about how, you know, we can bring those numbers up. And then Ben, I know, has some more information about the most vulnerable and about some incentives and some funding in the bill for homelessness prevention.
Yeah, so overall, the bill, or up to 80% of the bill, will go to serving low-income households across the state. And so that's defined as earning 80% or less of area median income, and up to 50% of the bill will go to serving extremely low-income households. And so just two provisions I'd like to shout out, but the Housing Innovations Fund is, we're proposing funding that at $200 million, and that can be used for permanent, supportive housing, but also transitional housing. And then we're also, proposing establishing a supportive housing trust fund. And so really the goal is that funding will be used to build, supportive housing so that we can, break out of the shelter system and really focus on providing folks with a more stable living situation.
Ben, can you and Eric also talk about the proposal for a little bit about the proposal for the Office of Fair Housing? Senator Edwards spoke about that. It's a really interesting piece, particularly because of our history of redlining and discrimination in the state of Massachusetts.
Sure. So the Affordable Homes Act, the governor proposes creating an Office of Fair Housing within EOHLC, within the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And this would be the first time we have a state agency dedicated to fair housing within the administration. And this would be an office that would work with communities on how to meet their fair housing obligations, not only in protecting against discrimination, but affirmatively furthering fair housing, taking proactive steps to undo that history of redlining and exclusionary zoning. There are a lot of practices that communities can do that are not in line with our fair housing, and we want to help them understand that and work with them. And as part of that, it would also create a trust fund, a fair housing trust fund, to support that work, to provide money to do that kind of technical assistance, education, outreach, and support the organizations doing that in Massachusetts. So a really important piece of this bill, and one that we hope remains in as it goes through the legislative process.
Yeah, we're really excited about this. And Senator Edwards is really excited about the Office of Fair Housing. She's also excited about the idea of you know, when a school district, for instance, is not performing to standards, the state has the ability to come in and take receivership. So there's some kind of conversation about, is there an ability for, on the housing front, if a town isn't doing what it should from a zoning perspective, you know, and from a housing production perspective, you know, which is in clear violation of the fair housing law, is there an ability to have zoning receivership, essentially, where the state would come in? I mean, this is a pretty, you know, I see eyes in the audience like, oh, geez, right? But like, you know, these are some of the kind of different ideas that we're sort of thinking about between this balance of bringing resources to address the problem, but also really not just asking, but sort of demanding that those resources that are deployed as expeditiously as possible, right? The slower we move on this issue, and the tricky part is housing production or housing preservation is not a swift process, and no one knows that better than islanders, right? Where complications of construction and getting supplies and all that sort of stuff. So these are just some of the different ideas that we're sort of toying with and weighing as we craft, you know, what we hope is truly transformational legislation.
So we have a question. Oh, David, great. Okay. David, go ahead, and then we're going to take a question from Jeanette DeLeon, who is the Affordable Housing Committee Administrator for Edgartown.
The senator was at.
David, can you identify yourself for everybody?
Oh,
too?
sorry, Executive Director, Dukes County Regional Housing Authority. Very nice to see you gentlemen here, thank you. And the carrot and stick policy, I like it, if that's not the official language, but Laura touched on it earlier, point that you made repeatedly, that we have to help ourselves first by utilizing all of the tools. And you pointed out some communities and here on the island as well are doing more of that. And, you know, specifically, I believe every town has a warrant article for raising their percentage of the short-term rentals up to 6%. You've mentioned that specifically in the past. The other one you've mentioned is the use of the existing receipts. Currently not $1 has gone to that. And it touches on something you said earlier too about, said it quickly and slyly, but supporting ownership and things such as, you know, environmental protections that end up raising property values. And there's a direct relationship over the last 4 years of receipts as to going into the general funds of the towns for COVID related things. But that in contrast, and some of those might be reasonable, but that in contrast to the fact that we haven't put any of those dollars into housing. I know that's a point you've made rather bravely here on a couple of occasions, and I'm giving you an opportunity again.
Sure. Thank you, David. So I'm always keen to look at how do we get creative ways to bring revenue to our communities, because I'm clear-eyed that when you apply a traditional state formula, well, we're going up against two things. One, there's the perception of these places, right? And appropriators in Beacon Hill, my colleagues think, oh, you're the state senator for like the Cape and Islands, right? How fabulous. And sort of imagine what this place can appear to be. And I think it is in some respects during those sort of busiest summer months. And so making the case for resources here and equitable resources here. One, you got to push up against sort of just that bias. Although when you peel things back and look at the numbers, you look at the enrollment in the schools and what do schools look like. You look at employment and unemployment. You look at food insecurity. You look at any kind of metric. We actually have quite a compelling story to tell here about geographic isolation and true poverty. It admits a whole host of other wealth. But the other challenge, right, is that often when we look at appropriating resources, we look at tax rates and property values. And compared to most communities in Massachusetts, property tax rates across this region are relatively quite low, at least compared to, suburbs around Boston where it's $20 or $30 a thousand. Of course, I don't want to go into there's a whole sort of good reason why that it's the case. So I'm often always looking for, all right, how do we get revenue? It's probably not going to come from Beacon Hill directly. We do have a lot of people who are here all the time, right? How do we take sort of other people's money to finance things and sort of make things work? And so in 2018, the legislature extended room occupancy tax to short-term rentals. This is a long time coming. In many ways, actually, the effort to get room occupancy tax on short-term rentals very much mirrors what we've been doing on transfer fee, right? It starts with a home rule petition, again on Nantucket, then an island town follows suit, then you got Provincetown following suit, right? Kind of the same kind of formula. And so when we did that, we allowed municipalities, so by extending room occupancy to short-term rentals, we effectively doubled the revenue source coming into municipalities in a local option. One of my big regrets, one of Sarah Peak, State Representative Sarah Peak, who's the state rep on the Outer and Lower Cape, the dean of the delegation, one of our biggest regrets in that law was not requiring that those dollars, those new dollars, be segregated into funds for either housing or infrastructure costs, wastewater costs. I know in State Representative Peak's district, since the law went effect, $18 million has been generated in local option dollars, been generated across those towns from Harwich to Provincetown. And only, I think, one or two, maybe three of those towns now dedicate a portion of that short-term of the room occupancy dollars either into housing or into wastewater. So, again, one of the ideas we're sort of thinking about and saying is like, all right, as we play with the seasonal communities designation, or frankly, if the transfer fee fight gets tough, right? If we get into a situation where we are really having to push up the hill to get a transfer fee done, maybe in the negotiation and saying, all right, a community can tap into a transfer fee, can have a local option transfer fee, but they have to, dedicate a certain percentage of their room occupancy dollars into housing, or dedicate a certain percentage of the CPA into housing, or have these sort of zoning policies or that sort of zoning policies. That's not sort of our first priority, but in thinking, I'm getting really into the weeds here of like, let us set a strategy, but this is like my day job and apparently night job. So like, this is like what we do, right? So just trying to think about that. But this is a really prime revenue source. And often what happens with new revenue, if you don't segregate it right away, it gets gobbled up into your general fund. I'm seeing all these select board finance committee people here, right? And then you got to take that override vote to kind of claw that money back. So that's what we're thinking about. While I'm talking about room occupancy, the other topic I want to bring up is wastewater. and the opportunity that island towns have related to the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. So when we passed room occupancy, we also created this fund just dedicated for Cape Cod that takes a 2.75% surcharge on all room occupancy, up and above the state, up and above the local option, puts that into a dedicated pot of money just for wastewater. All 15 towns on Cape Cod were automatically in. The Cape towns were actually sued. The Conservation Law Foundation sued US EPA for violation of the Clean Water Act and used the 15 Cape Cod towns as the example, and frankly would have won in court. There was a settlement and a whole kind of plan ensued. Cape Cod has a $4 billion wastewater problem. It's probably closer to $5 billion post-inflation. The Cape Islands Water Protection Fund to date, in its first 4 years, has generated over $100 million in wastewater funding across most towns on Cape Cod. It has been a huge success, more successful than we thought. And you've got a fund where towns as distinct as Barnstable, which is a town of 45,000 people, and Wellfleet, which is a town of 3,500 people, are getting along and figuring this out. At the time we were writing the law, Representative Fernandez and I said, well, we got a pretty big wastewater problem on the Vineyard, too, and Nantucket too, but, y'all were a little, you weren't sued, you were sort of a little further back in that process. So the law allows island towns to join the fund by a simple vote with their select board. The Martha's Vineyard Commission and Adam Turner, I know, who's is a phenomenal partner on this, has been participating in these meetings, participating in the fund. The fund has sort of worked almost better than we anticipated, and we haven't seen the turf fighting among towns. I get why islanders are always have a perennial good skepticism for getting lumped into anything with Cape Cod, because I get it. There's been a bad history there. But I really think when you look at needs for wastewater and wastewater infrastructure, this is a really essential tool. And again, it's other people's money that is not coming from the state, but through the state. And I think it really makes sense for island towns to look at this. I know the commission's led an effort for the Up Island towns to do some of their watershed planning work that's proceeded quite well. But it's really something I'd urge towns to look at. One, the product we sell in the global marketplace, why people come here is our pristine environment, our pristine marine environment. And we know that our lagoons and ponds aren't all that pristine. But then two, wastewater infrastructure is really what's going to allow us to build more densely and to frankly build the housing that we know we're going to need for year-round people, right? Title V septic systems are really good for 1 acre, 2 acre zoning, but ecologically they're a disaster, and they probably haven't been really great for on the housing front either. So just a pitch to kind of take a real hard look at that. And again, Adam has more information on this, but as we look at other tools we can bring against housing, to bring for the housing fight, that's another one that's on the table that's available to the island.
I think we're gonna, so Tom, if you don't mind, we'll go in order. We'll do Jeanette first and then Kevin, and then we'll go to you. Jeanette, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Good evening, and thank you for coming to the island. I am Jeanette Billy, and I am the administrative assistant / manager for the Edgartown Affordable Housing Trust and their committee. The question I have is that when I got on, Senator Sear briefly mentioned that the municipal housing and the example he also used for ADA for seniors and disability society in order to maintain them in our communities. My question is, just wanted to know the current status on this particular examples that he gave, and what's the next step toward these?
I think that was the accessory dwelling units. Was that where you were talking about the ADUs?
Yes.
Yeah, so the ADUs
what
about
this
what
are.
the provision looks like in.
So I think Eric should answer this because he's the expert on what's in the bill.
Yeah, and
It's a great question, Jeanette.
Yeah.
You can also talk a little bit about what municipalities are allowed to do, like deed restrict against short-term rentals, those options that are built in.
Sure. So in the Affordable Homes Act, there is a provision, a policy, one of the policy provisions is to allow accessory dwelling units, ADUs, the small, granny flats or in-law apartments or detached garage that you can convert into a housing unit, an apartment. to allow those kinds of ADUs to be built by right in every community in the Commonwealth. So by right means without a special permit, without needing to go get a, special permission from the community for the relief to do that. That would be in any single family zoning district in the Commonwealth. So it would be a big step forward, and we anticipate, we estimate that 8 to 10,000 ADUs can be built over the next 5 years if this were to be put in place. And we see more communities doing this. We also see a lot of our sister states doing this around New England and across the United States. So we really think that, this is low-hanging fruit. When it gets to, Shanette, you talked about, the relationship between ADUs and the elderly or persons with disabilities. ADUs are seen as a really good housing option for seniors, for those who they might own an elderly couple may own a large single family home and they want to remain there, but they need help keeping it up, or they need a little extra income. And an ADU is a way to provide that. They can either move into that ADU and then have someone move into a larger house, or vice versa, but it provides that opportunity possibly for them to remain in their home and in their community. Similarly with persons with disabilities, and this is what I talked about, if a person with disability can live in that ADU and can live independently, but have their family right there, if that's what they choose to do. And so this is something that's important to the disability community. Within the legislation, we would allow them to do by right, but communities could have some control over ADUs and what they might look like. But and one of those controls is they would be allowed to prohibit those ADUs from being used as short-term rentals. So we don't want to create just another vacation rental market. We want these to be long year-round housing. And so communities could put that restriction in place if they chose. So it's something that we are really excited about and hope that we can get through.
Yeah, so just to contextualize for the island, Eric, so you're aware, so Nantucket has ADUs by right, but none of the vineyard towns right now have ADUs by right across the board. There's accessory dwelling unit programs in the towns where you can create an accessory dwelling unit by right if you meet certain parameters, and it's deed restricted to year-round or year-round / affordable. But one of the reasons I think that Senator Steer mentioned ADA and seniors is that the AARP, this is one of their top priorities this year, is ADUs by right in the state of Massachusetts. A lot of I think our bylaws, the apartment has to be attached to the house. So what you tend to see in that case are basement or over the garage apartments, those are not accessible for seniors or folks who are disabled, people who are trying to age in place. So detached, the ability to do something that's detached or an addition on the ground floor has a lot more flexibility and more use. So that's why AARP is really supporting this ADUs by right. So next question, I think we had actually Kevin was next. And then we'll go to Tom and then we'll go to Melissa.
All right.
Kevin, can you introduce yourself for the folks on the screen who don't know you? Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm Kevin Devine. I'm a councilman with the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead Aquina, and I'm currently serving as acting chief of staff as well. And I'm also the housing authority chair for the Wampanoag tribe. I apologize, folks. You guys probably want to grab some pillows and take a nap. Like I have a lot of notes on here, and just bear with me because it's tied to some of the things that you guys asked on here and things that I've seen since I've been back. And I've been gone for 30 years and retired, and I came back 3 years ago. So, but so Eric, this is tied to some of the stuff that you brought up. Some of the areas that are focused for folks coming in there, folks with disabilities and all that stuff. I didn't hear you, I might have missed it, but did you say anything about veterans too?
I did, so I didn't mention, I didn't mention them specifically, but do you want, if I can, do you want to keep on asking, or I can respond to that?
No. don't go ahead.
Oh, so all of these resources can be used to support veterans housing. Ben had mentioned the Housing Innovation Fund. That's one that has been used to support housing developments for veterans with those support services that are often needed. So again, all these resources can go towards those developments.
And there's a second, isn't there a second fund that, I think Oak Bluffs, Mark Leonard, you know this, I don't have it in front of me, but Mark, can you tell us what the second fund is? You flagged two of them as potential for veterans housing funding. Do you recall?
I don't recall it.
Okay, right.
Okay, all right, thanks. So, you know, I'll jump into a couple tribal things. You know, this is a conversation Dave and I were just having, but is it possible for the tribe, as a sovereign nation, be involved with the housing bill that help tribal members on the vineyard? Well, actually, like in Tappan, like we have tribal members obviously on the Cape as well.
That I would say I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that,
Yeah.
but would love to find out the answer. Yeah.
All right, thanks. So, you know, so going into some of these things now, like what I was thinking of, like what I'm seeing since I've been back, you know, because, you know, like there's a lot of folks that aren't even here when I grew up here. And I understand, and I know everybody in this room understands what the problem is. You know, we got these multi-millionaires and billionaires coming up here and buying up all these properties. And Laura, you know, I listened to the 800+ units, you know, that we've lost for rentals. Do we have a number, like how many houses are actually on Martha's Vineyard right now?
I think it's 17,000, it's 17,000 and change.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with, you know, with some of these things, you know, like the Kennedy property and lands being donated and turned over, you know, people turning it into conservation land, you know, I think, you know, we have a fix, like we can fix these issues with, you know, what goes to land bank, MVC, Sheriff's Meadow, all that stuff. You know, there's land that we can turn into, you know, hopefully we can come to a point at some time, build these things in the small community, the housing communities for folks, you know, and I know funding is always gonna be an issue to try and build these homes. We have 6 projects right now being built on the southern coast of our island, you know, with these wind farms. Let's tap into those guys, you know, they're gonna make billions of dollars. Let's see if those guys can help fund, you know, constructing some of these homes for islanders down here. Because there's 4 that's, you know, in the making, and there's, you know, 2 pulled out that are, you know, trying to do some new, you know, renegotiate agreements, so if we can tap into that stuff, you know, like, you know, let's utilize what we have that's coming in here. Yeah, so some, you know, this is what I want folks to be aware of what we're dealing with as a tribe too. So currently we have 670 acres of property, and 55% of that is wetlands. So, you know, with what we're trying to do, you know, we want, you know, we have the ability to build homes out there, but that 55% of wetlands is like, that's what's holding us back. You know, and obviously we're trying to, you know, acquire more land right now, but we can't do any of this stuff with what we have right now. Like, you know, we're currently building a house right now, and it's actually almost on wetlands. But the houses that we've built, like, it's been 30 years that we've had these homes, and currently, so like there's structural damage, and you know, there's water that's leaking into these folks' basements. Obviously, it causes mold issues and all that other stuff. And you know, I know it's an issue actually, you know, in a lot of places in Martha's Vineyard, but you know, those are some issues that we're dealing with. We're trying to fix that stuff, but you know, hopefully some folks, you know, the governor or you know, you Senator Sarah, you know, if you guys can figure out these things and you know, help us push forward, because you know, we're trying to help folks right now within the tribe to you know, acquire some homes, but you know, just having 33 homes that have been lived in almost 30 years, but you know, in those things, we haven't built anything new for those folks. So you know, and I'll touch base with you, Laura, and some other folks to try and figure this piece out, as well as Dave. But I thank you guys for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kev.
I would be curious about, we've had quite a bit of success when we've taken up other legislation, making sure that we have either consideration of sovereign nations or carve outs has been the case in gaming. Actually, in the latest offshore wind procurement piece, the tribes are specifically called out. I'm really curious that there's a ton of federal funding, right? The tribes are able to access. I'd be curious, maybe the chairwoman knows about this or also looking at what existing federal programs exist and how the state could then set up sort of like a matching grant program or something like this, right? To then really maximize and realize those dollars. And then I think your point on the maintenance, I think we need to be very honest about the kind of costs that we're going to need to undertake here. Yes, to build and preserve homes, but then to maintain them. The town of Provincetown has this really interesting project. They created a year-round housing trust, and shortly thereafter, I think a 20-odd unit, maybe a 30-odd unit condominium was going up into foreclosure. The town bid on it and they won. It's called Harbor Hill, and it's middle-income rental housing. It's been quite successful as far as the people who are there. I know, like, so there's several business owners there, lots of friends are there, but the cost to maintain this place is like real expensive. And so I just think that comment, right, the maintenance of it is also just significant and something we need to be clear-eyed about. And I think also is something that when we look at where transfer fee dollars can go, this is part of the flexibility piece, right, that we're going to need.
Well, so with that too, Senator, with that funding, like the federal funds, like, we all understand that there's money out there, but all that stuff's competitive. Like, we're competing against other tribes, and normally the tribes that get awarded those things are the tribes that have, the huge populations. They keep getting this, they keep getting the money all the time. So you have like Apache, Navajo guys with 60-something thousand tribe members, and they're also the ones that have the most land within the tribe as well. So anything tied to land, they tend to get those things before us as well. So the smaller tribes are always left fighting for everything, trying to get all this stuff.
Yeah.
So, the issues that we have, we got some fighting to do.
I think this is a great, Kevin, I'm really glad you came and I'm so glad that you brought this up tonight, because I think something else that's important to have a discussion about at state level is that tribal housing counts on subsidized housing inventories. So the state's taking those units into consideration on the subsidized housing inventory and then providing towns with safe harbor or exemptions from 40B with that in consideration. So there seems to be an opening for a conversation on how the state might then partner with tribal housing to advance efforts to maintain and support tribal housing.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you guys so much. Tom, you're up next, and then Melissa, and then Jeanette had a follow-up question on the municipal employee workforce housing.
That's somebody in the back.
Oh, is that somebody in the back?
Tom,
Oh,
and a plus select board member, and I want to thank you for coming to our town, and I'm glad that we could host you. And I also want to thank Laura for all of the work that she's done on behalf of the region and coming to our meetings and all the town meetings to get housing to move forward. Proud to be from Oak Bluffs, where we're sponsoring the first veterans housing, the Southern Tier project, and we have other things in the that is just waiting to go forward. So we're trying to do our part. The skepticism that you mentioned between the Cape and the islands. I mean, if you I could not get my good friend Senator O'Leary to do it, or Senator Wolf, but I know my good friend Senator Sear will change the district name to the islands of the Cape. That would be the first thing to do. Is anybody who's worked in government as a county commissioner for 6 years, it's always the Capes and the Cape and the islands, and we are definitely getting after that. And to compare Nantucket and Vineyard, Nantucket has one town, one county. Select board are the county commissioners. We have 6 wonderful towns, 6 very different, socioeconomic breakdowns. It makes us unique, but it also makes it really challenging to get things done regionally. The one thing that I would like to say to the people, from the State House, Senator Seer talked about the issues around, the AMI, looking at 150%, looking at, let me say, like 200%. Like, why can't people, make that work? Well, you can't here. Like, I made the mistake once at the select board meetings. Well, our staff did the livable wage. I almost got laughed, because I look at my own, I teach online. I have a great job. I think if I were to survey people here who are executive directors, presidents, teachers, physicians even, they would tell you they caretake property, they bake bread. I mean, there's other things that people do, 2 or 3 jobs. So really consider that. There's the seasonal nature of our communities, but then there's the reality of how to make it work here. And people do many, many things to do that. The one thing I was going to get up and ask, and then you said more, is the autonomy of the zoning boards going to be threatened in any way? And that's a huge piece for us here, and I'm sure in many communities. So however, rather than having it imposed top down, like if we see that coming, down the pike, how can it be a teachable moment that we're part of that education? Because the zoning is one of the issues around housing for sure. But it's also something that's really made our island unique and preserved a lot of things. I think we can have both housing that is affordable and attainable for many, and we can also have conservation. I think both can coexist.
I'm gonna work on the name part, though I do want to note that all other senators are referred to as their district, the counties that are in the district. So Middlesex and Norfolk, or Suffolk and Essex, and Berkshire, Hampshire, and somehow this is Cape and Islands. It probably should be Barnstable, Dukes, and Nantucket. Although I guess Barnstable would come first because they do it alphabetically. Although when I say it fast, it's like Cayman Islands, people are like, Cayman Islands, you're representing the Cayman Islands. I occasionally get that. Although 2 off-islanders represent this island, I think we're quite proud of our track record of really showing up and trying to really go to bat for the far-flung reaches of this region. And as someone who also lives in a pretty far-flung place, this feels like a metropolis compared to Toronto and Provincetown right now at this time of year. So I really sort of get it. I think so. I have I have a prominent colleague in leadership in the Senate who is skeptical of the transfer fee, but who really says he's like, the problem is local control, and local control hasn't worked, and we should take it away. I think that we're not sort of there yet. And also that like the actual politics of doing that is tremendously difficult, right? Because you're essentially taking away authority from the people that electeds here from every day and have relationships with every day, right? If you watch and study how MBTA communities has played out, it's so fascinating to look at that balance. I think you can look at state, we are sort of later in this process than other states. If you look at the state of California is moving in really that direction where they are taking away local control. What I'm kind of really interested in, because a lot of this has to do with zoning and policies that these folks can talk about related to Greater Boston and sort of larger towns in Massachusetts. I'm really interested in getting policies and solutions in a toolkit that allow us to move forward as aggressively as possible on this issue as swiftly as possible. And here's what I've sort of found. There's sort of a life cycle to understanding this issue. And the towns I think Nantucket's a good example here, right? Because the issue is so bad on Nantucket. Like Nantucket will bring like a $26 million proposal to their town meeting to fund housing, and it like passes. Not without a fight, but it passes, and it passes strongly. We've seen this in Provincetown, where a decade ago, town meeting and housing politics in Provincetown was very contentious. Provincetown has reached a tipping point where now everyone understands how dire the housing situation is. We had a fall town meeting in Provincetown. It was downright serene and boring in a town that is really known for its colorful town meeting. In my hometown in Troro's very much in the middle of this thing where there's a debate in the town between, the housing advocate camp, which the Sear family is very much in around this opportunity. We have a 70-acre parcel we bought, and we want to build up to 150 units on that parcel. And the town is very divided on this, and it's really divided between longtime working folks, people with kids, people who understand how hard it is, and a number of the people who are opposing this, I don't really recognize them or their names, which means that they moved to town. My family had a restaurant in Truro for about 28 years. It was kind of like the place you went in town if you were like a hip summer person, right? So if I don't know who you are, it means you moved to town after 2012, right? So there's a bit of a divide there. Truro's going to move. Truro's going to shift. Like Truro will be where Provincetown is, right? Probably in another maybe like 4, 5, 6 years. The problem is we don't have that time. And even, I've been extolling Nantucket and the island and Provincetown. Well, the truth of the matter is like we're 15 years late on this issue, right? We talk all about Aspen and Vail and these models. They did this when I was in high school. And so the scale of the problem, like 850 units, that's really, really, really big. And so this is where, regardless of what we in the legislature do as it relates to local control, we don't have time to figure out and to wait and to see what the legislature ends up doing. We've got to move as aggressively as possible. And that's why we've really clearly put on the table both, housing production, but also preservation, right? Because as quickly as we can to sort of preserve as many units as possible for year-round use is absolutely essential. So that's kind of just like the life cycle I see. I think the challenge, and you spoke to this well, here, right, is that, 6 towns, 1 island is tough, but the more I think the more we can really work to bring tools to bear on this issue and to move forward expeditiously on this, but the scale of the problem and the scale of the solutions, people in Truro are like 162 units, like, oh my God, like this is like so huge. You're building a city, like what is, and it's like, that's about half the need for the town. What we really should be doing in Truro is probably like around 280 units at that site. Is actually solves the need. And by the way, building that more densely in a planned, efficient way is going to be a heck of a lot cheaper. What's actually starting to happen are, these like 20 unit, 30 unit housing projects that we really like to have that are the sort of mixed unit, affordable house. They're not penciling out. They're not able to build them. Like Philippe can talk to this. We have a project on the Outer Cape that basically post-pandemic inflation, they're $7 million short to pencil out this project, right? And if they actually went bigger, it would probably pencil out. So we've got to change our thinking a little bit. The last thing I'll say, and I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but just look at how, we were in Edgartown earlier today. We're driving through OB and Vineyard Haven. Look at how our villages were built. There was no way in hell you could build that today under existing zoning, right? So if anything, the development scheme we've had in the last, from the post-war period on, has actually not been how our communities have sort of been built historically. And so I think that density is sort of important. And we're sort of at this moment where I think we should look back to the conservation movement, which we should be really proud, I think, of what we were able to accomplish here. But that was a really big fight to establish the land bank. It was a really big fight to get it up and running, to get it enacted. Like what happened here literally stopped policy statewide. There's no other land banks. It's not a Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard and Park is what happened here because the fight was so hard and tough. And now we're sort of basically having to, I think in some ways we've been so successful in that area. And now we're having to figure out how do we also bring a scale and a scope to the housing challenge in a similar way. I think we can do it, but I do want to be very honest and clear-eyed about what we're up against and the need for us to, frankly, be moving a heck of a lot quicker than even what we can do. So I know that was a lot, but.
I think if I could add to that too, Senator, I think for the teachable moment piece, Tom, that you asked about, I think, so Nantucket has multifamily by right, is that correct? And ADUs by right. So I think looking at those things that Nantucket is doing and that P-Town is doing, they've added in their downtown areas higher, you can go higher, you can go to 4 stories now, as long as it looks like a 3.5. So a lot of these things fall under what's called housing choice. And Nantucket's been designated a housing choice community, right, Tucker? So to my knowledge, none of the island towns are a housing choice community, and I don't believe that any of us would actually qualify as a housing choice community because we don't have certain things. And Nantucket's proved that there's a way to do this on a rural island and still maintain the rural character of the island and the brand of Nantucket. So I think that teachable moment is, it's really important for our towns to actually look at what Nantucket is zoning. I know when I mentioned P-Town, people, I do get a lot from here, oh my gosh, the density in P-Town, yikes, like you don't wanna, people are concerned about that. But really look at Nantucket because they are utilizing these tools. And I know Tucker, do you wanna say something to that?
Thank you, Laura, and everybody.
So Tucker Holland is
Introduce
the housing director for Nantucket, for
Yeah,
anyone.
I'm Tucker Holland, I'm the housing director for Nantucket. Nantucket is not utopia.
No, I'm totally.
We know.
I know.
We have, voters have appropriated 83 million over the last 5 years. We have a $500 million problem. We don't have it all figured out, and I am extremely grateful to the governor and lieutenant governor and the secretary and his team and our outstanding Senator Sear, for their leadership on providing what they have included in this incredibly important bill. And I feel that they have handed us the ball. And it really is up to us to help them get it across the finish line. I must say, I came from the national championship earlier this week. I'm a big Michigan fan, go blue. So I'm gonna go with the, I have football metaphors on my mind. But it's such a big moment, and it's so well thought out. Not that there aren't some modifications that we all might want to seek, but this is truly an extraordinary moment, and it truly is our future. And I'm so appreciative. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker. Thanks for coming tonight too. And I did not mean to imply that Nantucket had it all figured out. Because
We got a long ways to go.
Nantucket, for those who don't know, the median home price on Nantucket is currently $3.3 million. And Martha's Vineyard is historically about 8 years, only 8 years behind Nantucket in our real estate market. So, but just to understand, my point was laying the groundwork to take advantage of everything that's happening to qualify for all this stuff. It's a great opportunity for us to take a lesson from what Nantucket's doing to lay that groundwork, so that when these things come online, as Senator Sear said, there may be some sticks along with the carrots. We want to make sure we qualify. Melissa, Vincent, are you still here?
Yeah, don't worry. I'd rather live on Martha's Vineyard than. Don't tell them that. It's true.
Melissa,
So
can
I'm
you
Melissa
introduce yourself?
Vincent. I am the executive director of TRI, the Resource Inc., and we work with folks whose incomes are at or below 100% median. We work with community development block grant funds, and we work with CDBG funds. We do this across the state. I happen to program manage the CDBG funds here on the island of all towns. So thank you for coming. Follow-up question on the ADU units. We all know, especially everybody here in the room, the cost of building here on the island, and Senator Sear and some folks from the Island Housing Trust, we've had a conversation about ADUs. First step obviously is ADU by right in our towns, or our zoning boards and our townsfolk getting together and just deciding we should be able to have them before having to wait for the legislature to say by right. But once we get them, will there be funding available for that, especially for our low to moderate income folks? So we work with a lot of the elderly. It would be great for them to be able to stay in their homes or actually move into an ADU with a son or daughter or a family member moving into the main house, raising a family.
while also taking care of mom and dad. However, with mortgage rates and with the price of building, without extensive subsidies on this, it would be very difficult to build. We're looking into that now. So I'm wondering if within the Housing Initiative Fund, there will be funding available for our low to moderate income folks for ADU subsidies.
So, and thank you so much for that question. It's something that we recognize as well, and the Lieutenant Governor has talked directly about this issue. We also think step one is getting ADUs by right. But then it is about building them. We said that, ADUs we estimate it can create 8,000 to 10,000 new homes over the next 5 years. But those are in ideal conditions, which we can create, but that's going to also involve, the financing and resources needed to build it. But again, step one, get it passed by right, which that's what we're working on now. And then thinking about how we can make it easier to build. I will say, there is a program in the Affordable Homes Act that does help build ADUs if it is specifically for a person with disability or for a senior. There's an authorization for a program called the Home Modification Loan Program. And this is something that it can provide up to $50,000 to build that ADU for a senior person with disability. Is that enough? No. But it's something that can help make that project feasible. And those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at of how to do more of as the state builds more, as communities throughout the state build more of ADUs, which we also think will open up a market for ADUs and bring in some new tools and resources. But that's just one of the examples of within the Affordable Homes Act. It's not only about the zoning, which we take care of, but also providing some resources to actually build these units.
Yeah, because we're gonna have an issue. I mean, I have a young family right now. Mom lives in the house. They've got a garage in the back. Young family has a child. They are looking at having to leave the island. They would like to stay here. They're looking at the garage in the back to turn it into, a place to live. But one of their first hurdles is wastewater. So they will have to have their septic system built so that it can take on the added wastewater. And then they've got the renovation on top of that. So they're probably looking at, 120 to 130,000
Sure.
to reno, and then they're looking at another 30 to 40 for the septic system upgrade. So, I mean, we're looking at $200,000 and a family leaving the islands because there's no place to live.
Yeah, I think that we've talked about this a lot. I'm a big fan of ADUs by right, but I'm pretty clear-eyed, having seen this play out in a number of towns. The cost to do new build is like deeply prohibitive to the point where like it's not happening. And so what I think you've been talking about, Melissa, you've been a real champion on this, and I think this is the right way to go, is the conversion piece that kind of gets us to ADU. And again, this is where the transfer fee, having flexibility for the municipalities on this is sort of really key here, and where the money sort of goes and how these trusts are set up is really essential. Because that might be the kind of help that we would, $200,000 cut up into money. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than probably the $600,000 or $800,000 it would be to do a standalone sort of new build. So I think we're spending a lot of time on that, thinking about. I'm spending a lot of time on the flexibility for where dollars are able to go, right, and having a nimbleness. One of the things that we're doing a lot of things in government, whether it be local and state government. One thing we're very not good at doing is moving quickly. And the real estate market and real estate inherently runs on a much quicker time, a much quicker timeline and timetable than certainly we move in government, right? So how this is structured becomes really important. I am gonna have to sneak off because I have to get my 8:30 back home.
It was more about having the flexibility to use the funds.
Yeah, and so this is
ways that are going to be helpful, and knowing that these subsidies might be big.
yeah, and
Same time.
and so this is where I think we're asking for ideas, thoughts, especially from municipal folks. So we're working on sort of two things here. One, we're working on the transfer fee, sort of what do we need around what's the threshold, the dialing mechanism, the exemptions. We've been working on this for like quite a long time, and we've got some good ideas here. but so there's feedback there. The second piece is on the seasonal communities designation, and that's where we're getting really, really creative, right? And we're talking about everything from property acquisition, dedication to lodging tax we talked about, CPA funding. There's some conversation about like actually, do you even look at how 40B works and how does 40B work differently in a seasonal community? And I don't have a heart attack. Every time we talk about 40B, everyone's like, we're not touching that. The covenant housing on Nantucket, the year-round deed restrictions, land trusts, lease to locals, year-round residential tax exemptions, and then a whole list of other statewide policies. State-owned land, right, is something that I'm a really big fan of. But you know what? I think we got to think differently about how we do it, right? Because in my hometown of Truro, the state in 2017 transferred a parcel of land to the town. We've not built anything on it yet. I don't think you should give the towns this land. I think the state should keep the land and lease it for 100 years. But anyway, these are the ideas and the thoughts that we're really mulling. And so we want to hear this feedback. We're in this very kind of active mode. We're really lucky, and I really want to thank Laura and the entire Martha's Vineyard Commission for really getting in a comprehensive way for the island. Look, it is difficult in a myriad of beautiful and frustrating ways, having 6 towns, 1 island. But having the MVC really helps the island speak with one voice, which has been tremendously helpful. So we're in touch quite a bit. So if you want to funnel ideas to Laura, you can always funnel ideas to me, directly as well. But we're really trying to figure out how do we build policy that's going to provide a series of tools that'll really be deeply meaningful and effective, and allow all of y'all to hit the ground running on sort of day one. We're 20 years late to the issue. We don't want to pass a law that's gonna, have us mirrored, further in that. So just thank everyone. I know the meeting's gonna keep going. Thank everyone for being here. Thank you to OB for hosting us in this gorgeous new facility. Thank you for letting us sit in the select board chair, these great seats. But really, thank you, everyone. It's really good to be with you. We'll be back soon. Thank you, Laura.
Go and down and leave this tonight. They're not staying here, great.
Yeah, they're staying. You got them.
If you guys can, we've got 5 more minutes. You guys can stay for a couple of minutes. We have 2 more questions teed up. So if folks are not, like, I know you probably all want to leave, but.
And I want to take it,
Yeah.
we wanted to talk about one
I
thing
wanted
in
to
this
clarify
feature.
one more thing,
Yeah.
and then this gentleman in the back, and then Shanette will go to you with your question.
Yeah, so to the point about rising development costs, the governor, in addition to filing the Affordable Homes Act, concurrently filed 3 executive orders. And so she established a housing advisory council to oversee the development of a 5-year state plan. She called on all state agencies and quasi-agencies to conduct a review of their surplus land and identify parcels that would be suitable for housing development. And then the last thing is she established an Unlocking Housing Production Commission, which is geared towards doing a comprehensive review of state zoning and regulatory law and regulations, with the idea being that the next big housing legislation the governor files or tries to push through would be a comprehensive zoning reform package. And so the work is not going to stop at this $4.1 billion bill. The administration is clearly committed to doing more on housing. And we understand that zoning, but also construction costs are a big part of that.
And with the state housing plan that we're putting together, we're doing regional listening sessions, and I hope that one of those, we're in the process of planning. None of them are planned yet, but hopefully might be able to come down to the islands to do 1 or 2 listening sessions. So we'll see. We'll work with Laura.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, and the gentleman in the back, and then we'll go to Shanette, and I will follow the night.
Thank you. My name's Ian Douglas, and I'm a resident of Tisbury. I'm also a participant in the coalition to create the MV Housing Bank. I want to thank everyone here tonight for being here, for listening to us. I want to thank the governor, lieutenant governor, and the commission for this incredible act and the work. We talked a lot tonight about ADUs, and that's really important. And I just want to underscore one more provision in the act and hope that it's maintained through all of the political work that's ahead of us. And that is increasing the size of ADUs to by right 900 square feet. Because right now, at least in Tisbury, the zoning limits an ADU, and we have an ADU in our house at 600 square feet. And well, that's great. It's good for a single person. It's good for an elderly person or someone perhaps who is living by themselves. It doesn't provide for young families. And increasing it by 50% from 600 to 900 square feet is huge as far as the flexibility for allowing for young families to live in an ADU. We haven't talked about young families. We haven't talked about ADUs and young families. And I think increasing the size from 600 to 900 would include the young family provision. So please maintain that. And if you want to go up further, even greater. So thank you so much.
No, appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Shanette, do you still want, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
I'm not sure who's going to answer the question, but I just wanted to know if someone could elaborate more on the municipality housing status and how does that, play a part?
Oh, so Edgartown is one of the towns. Nantucket has filed a request with EOHLC for permission to put permanent municipal employee preference on several of the units in a larger development a public development that they're working on. So the town of Oak Bluffs and the town of Edgartown are discussing doing the same thing. And I believe Oak Bluffs voted to authorize Deborah to put the letter together and file it. And Edgartown, I'm not exactly sure what their status is, Shanette, but my understanding from James that you're in discussion and he's expecting that Edgartown will file. I did get inquiry from the town of Aquinnah about the same thing. So I know this is starting to be a conversation in the town of Aquinnah. So I think what, Shanette, if I'm correct, what your question is what is the status of those conversations at the State House? And then,
Correct.
okay, and then if the question is where would this fit into the Affordable Homes Act? If it does, this is something that Senator Sear has been talking about as a potential for in the seasonal communities designation as that moves forward. So can Eric, I know this is very preliminary, but can you talk a little bit? Because I know this is of huge interest to all of the towns on where we are with conversation at state level. With
Sure, I know, and I've had some conversations with you and others. I know that there have been others from EOHLC involved in those conversations. We're taking a look at it. I don't have a definitive answer to offer, but we know it's a real issue that we're committed to engaging on. And in the Senator Sear talked about the seasonal community designation. That's why we created this designation for communities, for you to put together what it is that you need that meets your unique housing market challenges. That's the purpose of that designation, and what we want to come out of the legislation and then that designation, those suggestions. So
yeah. And Shanette, I'll say that one of the things that I'm doing some independent research on this and providing it to HLC. And one of the things that we're finding is that California passed the 2016 Teacher Housing Act, which authorized the state of California to spend public funds, both state and local, on specific teacher housing that is sole preference for school district employees. That's teachers, administrators, building staff. I believe it includes bus drivers if the buses are owned by the district and operated by the district. So there's precedent in California, which means that it does not conflict with federal fair housing, which is really important. So now the thing to do is provide this information to HLC, which we've just started doing, and then ask that their legal department start looking through this and seeing how this applies to Massachusetts law. And Eric said this earlier in the night, if there needs to be a change in Massachusetts state law, the first part is identifying what in Massachusetts law would conflict with something and then having a conversation around that. So that's sort of, does that answer your question about where we are at the moment?
It does.
I wish it was less complicated, but I think I think the important thing is that because there's precedent existing in California, that's incredibly important because we have a roadmap. The ADUs by right, California has done this, and I see right here a former California resident who very well knows how successful ADUs have been in California. They put, I believe it's over 50,000 units on the grounds in just like the last 5 or 6 years in the state of California. And those are largely privately funded accessory dwelling units, gentle density in largely working class neighborhoods. So, so the fact that that precedent exists is really heartening. And I think we were gonna call time. That was it. Thank you guys so much for your extra time. And you guys all know where to find me, so if you have more questions, reach out. That's fine. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Within the